Okay, hello. I am so excited to be here with you all today. Thank you for coming to this webinar. I hope, after this presentation that you really get some rich information and it will help with your relationships going forward. So I want to talk about working with deaf survivors. So I call myself, I use a pronoun she and her. Okay, go ahead. Next slide. Okay, so we have a deaf hotline. It's a nationwide service, provides resources. It's confidential. It provides emotional support. We also have referrals for survivors who contact us because they have a real need. They need to find a safe place in their area. And so, it's not only that, but we also provide services for hearing people as well. Sometimes when people contact us, they're in a serious crisis situation. And so we need to provide those immediate services in order to satisfy their needs, to reduce the trauma of referring out to other services and then them having to share their story and contacting other places. It's very, draining. So we want to provide everything in one-stop shop. So we're available through VP, through chat, through email. Yes, okay, next slide. So let's talk about what we're gonna learn today. I'm gonna explain a little bit on how to work with deaf or hard of hearing survivors. You're gonna learn about the physical space needed, also the assistive devices, how to communicate through writing. We're going to explain interpreters, and then we're going to have an activity on ASL versus English grammar. So it's going to be hands-on. I'm going to have you guys participate. And then also, we're going to talk about providing services to deaf or hard of hearing survivors. So as I go through all this information, sometimes you might, a slide will come up and I will ask a question. So if you could go ahead and use the chat feature to answer, that would be great. Okay, next slide. All right, I'm curious. I want to ask all of you a question. So in your careers and working in your field, how many times have you worked with a deaf or a hard of hearing survivor? I'm just curious how many experiences you've had so far in your career. If you guys could put that in the chat. Wow, okay. 0 to a few, 1 or 2 seems to be our average, not many. Okay, wow. Wow, thank you guys for your quick answers. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So I'm going to explain more about how you can be better prepared to work with hearing or deaf or hard of hearing survivors. Sometimes there's deaf-blind survivors as well. Okay, next slide. Okay. So a lot of your clients are hearing, and through your everyday life, you typically communicate with your voice. And with that voice, with communications, you have different tones and intonations, right? I know that this is new for all of us. Sometimes it's hard with the deaf presenter and then you add an interpreter. I mean, this is a real world challenge, right? This is something that we face all the time. And us, deaf people, we face these sort of accessibility issues all the time. And sometimes it's hard. We always have to pin an interpreter on our screen. And sometimes the hearing presenters don't realize that we don't have an interpreter. So I guess now it's the other way around. So I understand your frustrations. I totally, I know what you're going through. Thank you for your patience, and I'm so sorry. So thank you. It's good for everyone to have accessibility. We need Spanish speakers, English speakers, ASL, deaf users. So thank you for your patience, where we can all get accessibility figured out. So let's go back. So I was explaining the contents of this webinar. Perfect. Okay. So I am going to talk about how to prepare to work with a deaf or hard of hearing survivor. So we're going to be talking about physical spaces and how you can recognize that, assistive devices, how to best communicate through writing, how to use interpreters, and then ASL versus English, which is an activity, which is super fun. I'm going to have you guys participate in. And then specifically with Texas, we're going to be talking about an agency there. And so we're going to spotlight their agency and talk about resources there. Okay, next slide. Okay. So earlier I had asked a question about some of you. I realized you probably couldn't see me. So I already know the answer, the average answer for most of you on how many deaf or hard of hearing people you have worked with in your field. And so in your work, I noticed that the average answer was between 0 and maybe a few. So that, it really are numbers of the people who face that. We see this very often, is that a lot of people do not have the chance to work with deaf or hard of hearing. She's just reading the chat here. Okay. All right. Yeah, and then some are saying 0, some are saying maybe 2 to 3 people in 2 years. That's, very few. Okay, next slide, please. All right. So most of you are hearing, I assume, and typically you communicate with your voice, with vocal intonations, maybe some facial expressions, maybe some hand gesturing. And deaf people, they have all different ways of communicating, just like hearing people do. And it depends. Sometimes it depends on the deaf person's age. Sometimes it depends on their deafness, their background, their language abilities. They have variations within the community as well. Some may be able to read lips. Some may not be able to. It depends on personality, educational background, culture, and it's not all the same. There's a lot of variety within the deaf community. And it depends on where that deaf person learned how to sign and from whom. And also, it depends on where we go to school, what town we lived in, because often as a deaf person living, mostly have hearing family members, sometimes they don't have a chance to go to a deaf school, or they do go to a deaf school, but it's very different, and maybe the family never learned how to sign and they're the only person who knows how to sign. So then you'll see the signing styles within the deaf community differ. Okay, next slide, please. So most deaf people do use sign language to communicate, or finger spelling to communicate. Some may prefer lip reading, some may use their own voice to speak, but again, there's so much variation and there's different methods of communication within the deaf community. But the key before you begin working with the deaf person is to ask them, how do you prefer to communicate? What's the best way for you? And the reason is, most often survivors, they know their communication preferences better than we do. They know what's best for them. So please keep that in mind. And it's not how you communicate with them, but, it's not what you communicate with them, but that you do. Don't assume that they know how to lip reading. Is that because that could be your preference instead of their preference? Again, just ask them directly. How do you best communicate? What can I do for you? How do we communicate the best? And your job is to really ask them. And then that will help you to understand the survivor better and understand how to reduce their trauma when they come to you. Okay.
Next slide, please. Yes, and I am reading these comments as they're coming in as best I can. And some survivors or advocates can be really nervous and not sure exactly how to get involved or how to connect with the deaf or hard of hearing survivor. That's very normal, totally understandable. Okay, so let's talk about physical space. Most people that depend on lip reading, you want to make sure that you have to understand that a person that is lip reading requires a lot of concentration, and it can be very, very tiring. So you want to make sure that you are keeping things simple. You're trying to keep things with as minimal distractions as possible. Avoid windows. The reason for that is because of the lighting. The lighting behind a person can make your face very difficult to see, therefore difficult lip reading. So that's just another layer of a barrier that they need to be able to lip read, and it's very tiring on their eyes. So make sure if that is their method of communication that you avoid the window, and so that they can see your face clearly, and just so that you can speak smoothly as you normally would. When I am working with somebody that is a lip reader, try not to enunciate or to make any changes to how you speak. Just speak normally as best you can. Just try to keep your distractions to a minimum. Don't be playing with a pen in your mouth, having a distraction. You want to be able to have that person be able to just focus on your lips and not have a lot of distractions around. Next slide, please. When you begin to speak with a person, don't be moving around and speaking. If they require lip reading, make sure you are staying in one spot and looking directly at the person. Do not cover your mouth. Do not have any barriers or be looking at a paper. It's very distracting. They're not able to see your lips. So make sure there is nothing interfering or blocking your face, and just make sure that you are looking directly at the deaf person. Also, outside noises, again, as best you can, make sure doors are closed, rooms are quiet. Just try to minimize the distractions as best you can. If you are in a group setting and you are having one person that is lip reading, make sure that the person who is speaking raises their hand so that the deaf person has a chance to change their attention to that person, to allow them to be able to get the view that they need. So ask people to raise their hand, allow time for the attention to be shifted before speaking. And have everybody speak one at a time so that there's not a lot of interfering, a lot of cutting people off or talking over one another. They're not able to catch the information. So taking turns and speaking is very important. And there are some people who are really, really skilled with lip reading, and some people cannot lip read at all. Just make sure that you make the appropriate adjustments as needed. Sometimes just asking yes and no questions is not very beneficial because often when they're lip reading and they're nodding their head, you may misunderstand that they're actually understanding what you're saying, and they may not be. It is best to really expand your questions so that it's more than just a yes or no question. And don't assume that just because a person is nodding that they're understanding everything you're saying. Because you may think, oh, they're saying yes. Sometimes a deaf person is nodding ahead like as an indication, like, okay, yes, I'm following that you're saying, but I might need some more information. So it's just a gesture that they are with you, but not fully understanding. Oftentimes people who are trying to read lips, they're actually only getting maybe 50 to 75% of the message. So that means, 25 to 50% of the information is being missed. And the reason for that is because you're trying to figure out each word. You're trying to get that into your brain, to process it, to make a sentence, to see if you're understanding what's going on before you respond. And if you're gone ahead, they're still trying to get that information. They're trying to get all of this information into their brain to process it, and they're going to lose some of that information. That's very normal. And they're trying to think, okay, what is that? What did they just say? What was that one word? So you have to understand that 50 to 75% of the information, if they're really skilled, that is all they're getting. So understand for that situation, if you're in a hurry or you're rushed, that's a lot of information is going to be lost. So again, it's just very important that you ask them what their preference is. That is the most important thing as far as communication. And it's okay if they say, oh, I don't understand. It's okay to try a different method, another way to do that. Take the time to explain. Sometimes when somebody comes in with serious trauma, maybe, they're just feeling lost and overwhelmed and they're in shock and they're just nodding like, yes, okay, go ahead. Yeah, okay, yeah, sure, okay. They're not really fully understanding. So taking the time to really kind of expand on the information and helping them understand where they're in. Maybe that person is like embarrassed. Maybe they don't really want to answer questions. Maybe they did really experience sexual assault or things like that. And so but they don't want to say anything, and maybe they're just kind of dismissive or being agreeable. And really, it's important to have that communication and ask them, do you have any questions? I just want to confirm that you're understanding, and that's totally okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is your opportunity to how to make a space for people that are dependent on lip reading, or for hard of hearing individuals who have strong lip reading skills and maybe are able to voice for themselves a little bit. This doesn't apply to everyone in general. Again, everybody, it's a case-by-case basis. But this may be beneficial for you or your agency who may not have any clue of how to deal with these type of survivors. This is a good opportunity for you to develop for your space. Having a picture book that has very common images of law enforcement, nurses, court, judge, birth control options, drugs or alcohol, having those different images. Picture books, kids books, because sometimes when they are in that situation, they're not sure what is happening. Like if they have to experience a rape kit, the nurse can show them what's going on, and then you're able to explain some things. Picture books are very effective for them to be able to see that, and you're able to have all of that information. It doesn't answer everything, but it is a temporary tool to use in emergencies. During a conversation while you're chatting with somebody, really make sure, try to notice, are you understanding? Do you have any questions? It's okay to interrupt me. I want to answer your questions. Don't just keep talking just to get it over with. It's best to ask them, are you okay? Do you need a drink of water? Anything like that? Is there anything that you need? Ask if they need any time to decompress. And then if they are somebody that comes in with major trauma that is very burdened, having a communication barrier for that survivor is very difficult. Offer them anything you can to reduce their trauma is a good thing. And then they'll be able to open up to you. It's also best, again, like in group settings, to have individuals that want to speak to raise their hand, taking turns, so that everybody can have undivided attention. Oh, I'm just looking at one of these comments from Vina. Okay, written in main languages, so they had accessibility for those that had language needs. Yes, this is often in shelters. There's oftentimes just, one deaf individual, everybody else is not deaf. And, that's a really tough situation. It can be very overwhelming, very isolating. So having picture books, accessibility, anything that can help with communication is wonderful. Because it also helps people that are not deaf in that shelter to be able to open accessibility and communication with the deaf individual as well. So having that education, those things that are available is very important. It's important to have the education. I know the education is lacking everywhere, but having this available and communicating with them, writing, texting through the phone, having pictures, visual aids is definitely helpful for a survivor to feel more welcome and to feel more included in the shelter, in the place they're in. And thank you for bringing that up. I appreciate that. Next slide, please. Okay, so my next question is, okay, for assisted devices, do you provide any of these options for your deaf and hard of hearing individuals in your shelters, your agencies? Are any of these devices that are used by deaf and hard of hearing individuals, are they provided in your area? Okay, so yeah, very basic as TTY, video phone, alarms. Oh, some have a bed shaker alarm, door knock alarm. Awesome, right. This more accessibility is needed for survivors. Oftentimes when survivors come in to hearing shelters, the accessibility is very limited. And it's very traumatic for us on top of the trauma that has already been experienced. And so it's another reason to go back to the abuser, because you also feel isolated in this place, surrounded by a bunch of hearing people, and also not having any sort of assisted devices available in the shelters or the new situation. It can be very overwhelming, and it's easier to go back to the abuser because it's more comfortable, because there's the video phone there, the alarms are there, the flashing lights are there for the doorbell. All of those things are already in the abusive environment, and so oftentimes it's a lot easier to go back home to the abuser because the accessibility is better there than it is at this new safe place. So the alarms are really great light flashers for like when the baby cries, or the bed shaker is sort of like a pager, you know, having something that vibrates to warn that somebody is crying or somebody's at the front door, or have an alarm set up on your phone or on your watch can alert you to different things. If somebody rings the doorbell and the lights flash in the house, you know somebody's there. Hearing aids, cochlear implants, all of those type of things. All those devices help some people in hearing things. Closed captioning. That's a big discussion. Closed captioning. I know some people prefer closed captioning because it's easy. You know, having that on TV, it's really easy. If it's already on there, then you know what they're talking about. Then you know what's going on. You're able to have accessibility. If closed captioning is off, and then the survivor has to say, oh, you know, do you mind turning it on or setting up closed captioning? And then they're like, okay, fine. But if a person is, or if it's already on there, and maybe the person doesn't know how, or just knowing that it's already on is knowing that that effort has already been made is huge for a lot of people, knowing that it's already available. It's very important. TTY and video phones. Understand that the TTY is much less used today. The TTY is often more in rural areas where they don't have very high internet speeds. So a lot of people are not using that anymore. So for those that have better internet signal, like in the city or, you know, things like that, they have the video phone. And like things like Zoom, it's very similar. You're able to see a lot more and you're able to communicate via sign language. So the video phone is definitely more effective. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so communication through writing. Understand that communication through writing does not always qualify as passing along the information. You have to understand it is good in emergency, quick situations, like if something needs to be, some service needs to be provided now, then yes. But again, it's important to ask the survivor what their preference is, which means if a person walks in and they, you know, I need services, oftentimes, you know, we're willing to just accommodate what the survivor needs. Also recognize that you need to ask, always ask them first. If they prefer to write, fine, but don't assume that writing is going to be the best way of communication for them. Oftentimes, for many deaf individuals, English is their second language. So it's not always the best option. Also, keep your writings short and sweet. You don't have to write down every single word. You can just keep it very, very simple. You could write like, you need blanket. Yes. Okay. What else do you need? Things like that. You could ask them, do you make, you know, request or ask interpreter? Do you need it for the next meeting? Yes, no questions are very good. So if you're writing in communicating via writing and you're writing down these huge words like medication, for example, medication is very difficult. It's best instead to show a picture. Like we all use our phones a lot, and it's really easy to do a Google search, and you can type in the medication name and it'll pull up a picture, and you could show them, you know, do you use this? And, you know, they may not know the full name, but they recognize that that's the pill or the medication. Then you can kind of get a better idea of what's going on. So make sure that you understand that you don't really need to use a lot of big, complicated words.
Okay, I can take it, Amber. One person had asked a question, had said, Peggy, what's the difference between hand talk and sign language? Hand talk do you mean hand gestures? Like it could be a gesture. That is not a language. That is, it could be a home sign or something that someone personally uses at home. That is not an official complete language, and it's not ASL. So sign language is an actual language. It has a language basis, it has grammar. Hand talk, it could be, I don't know, a gesture is a completely different thing. So I recommend don't use hand talk because that could be offensive to the deaf and signing community. So using hand gestures, maybe that would be a better way to describe that, possibly. But sign is an actual language and it is used more commonly. Thank you for asking that. I really appreciate you for bringing that up. Okay, one person mentioned, why do we have to use video phone in a different room? Unfortunately, due to FCC, which is the Federal Communication Agency, they have their own rules that you can't be in the same room while you're using their services, the video phone services. But luckily today we just passed the FCC law. I think it was just last week, 2 weeks ago, something like that, just very recently, that they have permitted interpreters to use VEPs to use it in the same room. So they actually just barely passed that bill. So yeah, that's a new update. I can let you know you now can use VRI and be in the same room. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, interpreters. So if your survivor identifies as a deaf or hard of hearing person and they ask for an interpreter, then please, make that happen. Don't assume, oh, well, I need proof of your hearing. I need you to prove that you're actually deaf. Are you sure you can't lip read? I think you'll be fine. This is no big deal. Please do not do that. Please accept what they're saying because they're asking for an interpreter and that's what we should follow. So interpreters, they provide so much communication and they reduce those communication barriers. The deaf community uses interpreters all the time. They prefer interpreters because, maybe they're not good at speaking English. Maybe they don't understand reading English. And for interpreters, it's so easy for them to translate that to ASL. So please please recognize that interpreters, you not only if they ask for one, but you can offer interpreters as well. Go ahead and offer that. It's a great resource. And also, if you communicate through writing or lip reading or other ways, really the best way is an interpreter. That is the best option. I know in an emergency, sometimes it's hard to request an interpreter because interpreters tend to, they tend to be booked out. So it's best if you could be prepared ahead of time. If you could make an appointment or request interpreters 2 weeks ahead of time. Sometimes it does take some time to go through those agencies, but if you have a survivor, just walk in. It's possible interpreters might not be available, and then you can try to modify and try, the best way to communicate with them. Okay, next slide. Okay, I'm just trying to read some of the chat. People are asking about interpreters through the phone, like VRI. And yes, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in just a minute. Okay, so interpreters have various levels of skills within the community. So some interpreters are very proficient at ASL, and some are assigned more English-based. So please be sure to do your research. It's important that you ask for a certified sign language interpreter, because in some states, it's not required to actually be certified. So it means that they could just grab anyone off the street who knows sign language. Maybe they just barely got out of college. Maybe they're a brand new interpreter. Maybe they aren't the best fit or qualified for your survivor. You know, it's possible they are not there to understand, you know, basic medical things or legal terminology, but they only know basic skills. So be sure that you check for that. To have a certified interpreter is the best. And sometimes they, you know, the survivors are maybe sign differently depending on the region or depending on the educational background. Sometimes an interpreter may say, you know, I don't understand this person very well. So please be sure that you're asking for a certified interpreter. And there are a range of interpreters. There are certified deaf interpreters, actually. So what they do is they are both deaf and proficient in the language. So they work with a hearing interpreter. The hearing interpreter would tell them what is happening in ASL. And then the deaf interpreter is able to modify that to fit ASL and to fit the needs of the survivor. They can explain things, they can go into depth, they can make sure the cultural understanding is there. That's called a CDI, Certified Deaf Interpreter. Also, there's a deaf interpreter who isn't certified. Sometimes they could be qualified, sometimes they're not a qualified interpreter. It depends. Again, you need that certification. The next person is an ASL interpreter. It means that they are a hearing person and they learned ASL, whether they took classes or you know, they became a certified ASL interpreter. And then another person who knows sign language, but maybe isn't certified. Maybe they're a CODA, they're a child of a deaf adult, so they grew up using sign language. And sometimes it can be good, sometimes not so good because they're not certified. So again, make sure you're seeing the difference between certified interpreters and not. Because sometimes, you know, people say, oh, the cost of interpreter is so high, but this person, they have, you know, such cheap rates. They're only $20 an hour, but they're not certified. They know sign language, so that's better than nothing. So they bring in this person and they realize they just barely know sign language and they're not understanding what the deaf survivor is saying or what they need. Maybe they're interpreting information incorrectly. And then that adds to the trauma for the deaf survivors. And it's often not a good idea to take that route. Another option is a deaf-blind survivor. They have protactile interpreters, meaning they use their body to, like down here and up on their shoulder, to talk to the deaf-blind person. And we do have those deaf-blind interpreters. So they're skilled in figuring out how to help people with limited vision and people who are blind. So please make sure to ask your survivor, hey, what do you prefer? What kind of interpreter? Do you need ASL? Do you want a CDI, a certified deaf interpreter, to help you? Please offer that to your deaf survivors and give them the chance to decide what they think is best for them. Maybe they'll say, you know, I'd rather an ASL interpreter, or even the interpreter themselves. Do you have someone you would suggest? But because the deaf community is very, very small, it means the interpreters are maybe very, very close to the deaf person, or maybe even to the abuser, which could cause a problem. So if you just pull in any interpreter and you tell them the name, you know, the deaf survivor, the name of the interpreter, and then you bring them in, and then the survivor says, no, I don't want that person to interpret for me. And so don't become upset or ask why or ask questions like, we, you know, did all this work and brought in this interpreter. Oftentimes they need to decide what's best for them. And that person could be very related to the abuser or have close relationships. And so we're all human beings. And sometimes we often make mistakes in our life. And that's the same with interpreters. Interpreters do the same thing. Maybe the interpreter has a close relationship to the abuser. So is that a good idea to bring them in to speak with the survivor? No, it's not. So again, make sure you ask the deaf survivors if they have someone they recommend or someone that they don't recommend. If there is a name of an interpreter they prefer that we could reach out to. And also survivors who identify as Black or Indigenous or people of color, they prefer to have an interpreter who looks like them. That's also a very, very important point. It's good to ask. And sometimes they'll say, you know, they don't have a preference, but just tell me the name of the interpreter. And then once you get confirmation with the name of the interpreter, please immediately share that information with the survivor and let them know the agency or the name and ask if that's okay. And again, this would be best ahead of time. And let them know, you know, if anything else happens, like a change of date or you need to cancel, please let us know. Because, you know, life happens, things come up, deaf people get stuck on the bus and stuck in the traffic, just as hearing people do. Or maybe an abuser has kept them home and they're unable to come to the appointment. Maybe they're unable to escape. So please be understanding of those situations that life happens. And sometimes deaf people do have to miss those appointments, even if you get an interpreter. And that just happens. Maybe they forget, maybe something has come up. Please try to be understanding when that happens. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, I want to answer one person. Kayla says, how does anyone here find your local certified interpreter? So if you contact an agency, you can say, hey, I need a certified interpreter. That's all you have to say. Well, and you can emphasize a certified interpreter. And the agency, they know, they have a list of interpreters who are certified and some are not certified. Some have different credentials. So just let them know, hey, I'm looking for a certified interpreter for this appointment. So, you know, go through an agency and they should be able to help you. Okay. So when you are sitting down and an interpreter comes, please make sure that you are continuously looking at the deaf person. You're speaking directly to them. Don't say, hey, interpreter, can you tell her or ask them, I need her ID. Can you ask them? Instead, pretend like you're speaking directly to the deaf person. The interpreter is just the messenger. So they don't really need to be involved in the dialogue and the conversation. They shouldn't be adding in their opinions or anything. They are just there to facilitate the communication. So please just look and speak directly to the survivor. And sometimes you might feel offended that the deaf survivor isn't maintaining eye contact with you because they do need to look at the interpreter. And with sign language, obviously it's visual. They need to be looking at them and they'll look usually back and forth between the interpreter and the hearing person. And then the deaf survivor will make eye contact when they're speaking to you and when they're signing. But if you wonder why they break eye contact, it's just because the interpreter is there and is making sure that the proper information is being conveyed. So please be understanding in that situation that eye contact may be a little bit different than what you're used to, but for your approach, it's very important to continue to talk to the deaf person. Okay, next slide. Okay, this is a sign. What do you do? Do you use the children to interpret for a deaf parent? What do you guys think? Oh, it's a big no. Never do that. I'm emphasizing, please never use children as interpreters. Because you do not want to put, you know, that second trauma onto the children and then they have to interpret for their deaf parents. That's just not okay. The children identify, you know, especially babies, a 2-year-old or 1-year-old, do you think they have the vocabulary to interpret this whole situation? No, they do not. And that is sensitive information that they're going to be talking about. And then the parents have to tell the children all this sensitive information. Will they understand it? No. So again, please never use the children or family members, friends, you know, colleagues, co-workers, neighbor. Please do not use them as interpreters. It's not appropriate. We should never be doing that. Because, you know, that is violating their rights on how they want to communicate with you. We do not need to include those people within those situations. And so it's important for you to know how to support your deaf survivors. And, you know, some of these stories are very embarrassing or shameful, or the person feels very alone. So we don't need to emphasize that. It's really important to observe the situation and ask again what their communication preferences are and what they would like. And again, always hire a certified sign language interpreter. That is the best way to go about it, instead of saying, oh, that's okay, we'll figure it out, or bring someone in who just knows sign language and isn't certified. Please do not do that. Please use a certified interpreter. Because if the person maybe doesn't want an interpreter, that's fine. You can respect their wishes. And when maybe the interpreter, they ask for interpreter, when the interpreter arrives, the deaf survivor could say, oh my gosh, no, I know this person, I don't want to use this person. Then please don't feel offended or feel like you did all this work for nothing. And now they're not willing to use the interpreter. Please understand that they have, their safety comes first and their preferences come first. So if a deaf survivor says, you know, I don't care, let's just go ahead and use my friend, she's great at sign language, or I prefer to use my family member, that's okay. But again, I recommend not doing that. Because if they say to use their family members, you know, if a situation becomes very serious, it can become very difficult. And then again, we're adding more communication barriers. Maybe the person will interpret the word wrong. Maybe they feel like you're not understanding what I'm saying, or there's some communication breakdown. And so that can lead to a lot of misunderstanding and then a lack of services. And it's a very sticky situation. So again, I just recommend not using family members or friends for interpreting. Yes, so video interpreting, VRI, like Rebecca had just mentioned. One person was really upset that they used VRI. And the reason is because often VRI is not fluid and not great. The video quality is sometimes not very good. Sometimes your agency has really terrible service, and then the person can't really understand them. Maybe the picture is blurry or keeps freezing, and then the interpreter is not getting the right information from the deaf survivor. Or maybe the interpreter is giving the information and again, it's freezing. So the survivor becomes frustrated. It's hard to understand what's going on. We have to keep pausing the meeting, but the person keeps talking, and then the survivor is missing all the information. So often VRI is not the best service. It's so I always ask, again, what is their communication preference? You know, even if they say I prefer an in-person interpreter, then please try to do what you can to get that. Even if it takes a week, that's okay. They'll be willing to wait for that. They're willing to wait for an in-person interpreter. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we have a fun activity, and I would love for you all to be involved. Okay, so this is a real scenario written by a deaf person who uses ASL. And again, deaf people vary between children and adults, language deprivation, if they're from another country and they've come to learn ASL as their second language, they have all different types of backgrounds. So in this activity, I'm going to show you an ASL slide. So the interpreter is going to turn her voice off. And I want you, audience, to just see what you think the situation is, what that person is trying to tell you, or what the story is. And I will sign it. And the Spanish interpreter, just go ahead and read it, and you can interpret it in Spanish. So the audience is going to have to type into the chat. I want to see your guys' guesses and see what you think this deaf person is saying and what the sentence means. And then I'm going to show you the English translation, and then I'll have the interpreter come back again and use their voice. Okay. All right. Here we go. I'll give you 1 minute to read this.
Okay. Daddy hit many, many blood. Me saw. I'm afraid. Ran to tell a friend. Call police. Maybe jail. Oh, there's a lot of comments. This is good. This is really good. Oh, so many good comments. This is great. You guys got a lot of the good concepts here. Okay, go ahead and show the next slide, please. Yes, some of you guys guessed pretty accurately. You probably saw me sign that there was a hitting gesture and blood. Saw blood on the face. I ran to get help, said something to a friend. That friend was able to call the police. Dad maybe gone to jail. So yeah, you guys got most of the concepts. So the ASL slide showed what the ASL would be from a child. And then trying to figure out like who hit who did he tell, what actually happened, why. It's very tough, especially for a deaf child that would definitely doesn't have the same concept of English as we do. So to change that, to have the communication be priority and trying to figure all of that out is very, very difficult. All right, let's see the next slide. All right, go ahead and type in the chat what you think this slide means. Interesting. I'm loving to see these comments. This is great. All right, next slide. Let's show the next slide, please. So the woman is screaming. The child is looking at this person, and this is probably what the child saw. And the woman is yelling and screaming, but the child can't hear. I can't tell what she's yelling about. A child is just going to assume and write what they assume or what they're seeing, what the face looked like, but not fully understanding the entire thing. So basically, the child could not understand her. So in ASL, when you're switching it over to the target language of English is very challenging. So often a deaf person who comes in and can hear nothing is going to have a very different experience than somebody that can hear a little bit or somebody that can hear a lot more. There's so many different factors that go into it. The words, the sounds, what they're able to hear or see, and it's different from a child to an adult. So this child could not understand what was going on around them. They cannot hear, all they can tell you is what they're able to see. So you can see that that can be quite the challenge. There's a lot of things that are missing. Same for a person who is lip reading. And if they're sitting there trying to read your lips and trying to get the concept, it's the same idea as these slides. Let's do one more slide. Go ahead on the next slide, please. So man driving, drinking, saw a dog. Woman saw it, told. Horrible. So what do you think that story would mean in English? Mm. All right. Yeah, this is a very, very challenging one. So don't feel like, oh, I'm really struggling. Like, yeah, it is hard to understand this. Okay, so let me sign it one more time, how it is on this slide. All right, let's go ahead and show the English one. Next slide, please. And you're all going, where's that tree? Where was the tree? Where did the tree come from, right? I signed this classifier here. Here's the car, saw a dog, the car swerved and hit. The woman that saw it and told me about it was a friend of mine. She'd seen it. I mean, I didn't sign like, oh, this friend who I know saw it. The signing is very different than how you say it in English. So the simple sign of me holding my hand with my index finger up to represent a tree, that is something that is unique to ASL. So possibly if you're asking somebody to write things down and they're trying, again, English is not their first language. Oh, that man, drunk or drink, dog, those are maybe some things that they are able to take and put into English. But signing in their native language is so much more easier. It's creating a picture. It's very visual. The man that was driving saw this dog that was here. The car swerved around and hit something. And a lady that saw it told me all about it. And this simple sign here is basically, that means I can't believe it. And that's just a simple sign. So putting all of that together into ASL, you can see how different it is, how many variations there are, grammatically how it's different than English. There's so much information in ASL that is not written in written English. So when you're asking a deaf survivor to write things down, if that is their preference or not, just understand that what they're writing and what you're getting may not be the full thing as well. It is a challenge. It is a barrier for sure. And that is why it is so important to have an interpreter as well, to really minimize those barriers. Okay, thank you very much. Next slide, please. So as you are working with deaf and hard of hearing, deaf and blind individuals, remember that all of these people, their communication needs are not going to be the same. I really want to emphasize, please just ask them what they prefer. It is their right. If they want to have ASL, signed English, pigeon signed English, if they want tactile, whatever it is, if they prefer lip reading, okay. Ask them if they prefer to write, if they want an interpreter, whatever they want is fine. But ask them first. Don't rely on your preferred method. And you might think, oh, writing is so boring. Can you just read my lips? No, you need to let them tell you what their preference is. Next slide, please. Oh man, there's a lot of comments in the chat box. Yes. So yes, interpreters can make a huge difference, and making sure that they're certified as well. We do have certified deaf interpreters, which is great, and especially for those that are deaf blind. You know, we really just want to reduce the stress and trauma that these survivors have already gone through when they come for services. Okay, so I do want to talk about the agency that I had mentioned earlier in Texas. This is a DeafShare. They work with people who have very reasons of trauma, and they work with survivors of all kinds. Whether somebody is profoundly deaf, whether they are deaf and are fluent in ASL, whether they're hard of hearing, whether they, you know, half sign, half read lips, whatever their method may be. Oftentimes, as a advocate or social worker, or what have you, not knowing how to work with a deaf survivor or how to request an interpreter, please, DeafShare is a great place to ask. They already know who is a good interpreter, who is qualified. You can ask for their participation as like a co-advocate for services. If you're like, oh, like I really need help with the shelter, like I don't know what to do. Maybe a deaf individual is feeling left out or unsupported. DeafShare is a great resource to be able to send advocates to your office to make sure that the deaf survivor is feeling more welcome, that has communication and able to understand their culture, their experiences. It's just a really wonderful service. Advocacy is really wonderful to partner with DeafShare. I've used them often. The agency really encourages advocacy. It's very small, but also, like I said, like with shelters, a lot of people don't know about the services that are available. And, you know, they want to be there for court, be there for therapy. I know advocates are also very hard to come by at times, but your agency can provide so much more by reaching out and using these services for deaf survivors. I also want to show you on the next slide their information, so you can take a screenshot or, you know, save it later. You'll have the information for later. Next slide, please. So this is the contact information, and you'll receive this later as well. But if you want to go ahead and take a screenshot and save this, then you can. Next slide, please. The National Deaf Domestic Violence Hotline is something that is why we're here. We are here to provide services for any who may need any sort of connection. Maybe your state does not have a deaf agency, and how to find somebody close by, go ahead and contact us. We are happy to provide as many resources and benefits that deaf survivors may need. We partner with NDVA as well. We are using their database information so that we are able to have that also with our deaf individual resources and work together. And so that we can work together to develop a safe, resourceful place for deaf survivors. So again, here's that number for the deaf hotline, and we're available through chat and email. We also have a lot of content for ASL, for signs, for health plans on how to contact us. We have ASL visuals for people that might need that type of information as well. It's all there on that website. Person commented, I use Dawn in Maryland. Oh, yes, that's wonderful. Yes, Dawn services in DC and Maryland and Virginia will have that as well in the future too. I'm curious, let's see. How does this work when they call? Okay, so the services are through chat. So basically through the computer or whatever, same as email. The video phone is a little bit different. So we actually are able to answer and the interpreter will be there. And so the person that is calling can talk to the interpreter assigns to the person on the hotline and goes back and forth. So for emotional support, safety planning, all of that. But if a person calls directly through the video phone to us, there does not need to be an interpreter there because I am able to sign directly to that other deaf individual that's calling in through the video phone. So that is oftentimes a preferred method for deaf people. They're able to just talk directly because we can see each other and sign that way through the video phone. Okay, well, that is all I have. I don't know if there's any other questions or comments from the chat. I know it was quite full.
Wonderful. Yes, this was such a great session. Thank you so much. And we appreciate your patience with the technical issues. We do have some questions that are in the Q&A. Someone asks is it common for a deaf or hearing impaired individual to access the chat hotline using the text feature via the hotline's website to be connected with an advocate?
If the person that is on the phone is able to go into the chat, then yes, they can. But for their personal texting number, no, they don't do it that way. It's only available through the website. So the website chat or Facebook chat, also Instagram chat. That is how the chat feature is accessible.
Okay. When using the relay service, when communicating with the survivor, is the interpreter on the line the same identified gender as the survivor who is calling?
No, unfortunately, no. Deaf survivors don't really have the power to choose which identity or interpreter they get through the video phone. Any person, the interpreter that is available, their system just automatically connects them, and they can accept that interpreter, or they can say to that interpreter, hey, do you mind transferring me to such and such interpreter? And they can. Sometimes there's not an option of that person being available. That specific gender may not be available. So yeah.
Okay. Where can one access a CDI?
Okay, so again, your agencies should be able to provide the services and list for CDI. Not only that, but there's agencies all across the different states. I can't name all of the agencies for all the states that are available. Each state has a lot of different interpreting agencies. So I would encourage you to do your research and just connect with. You could also connect with Sorensen, the company Sorensen. There's also interpreting companies that are nationwide. And or individual states that have agencies that could provide that information. You may have to do some research, look for a deaf center within your state as well. Usually there's 1, 2, maybe 3 agencies for each state, and you can ask them, where is the best place for me to find a certified deaf interpreter? They would be able to have that information. They have that list somewhere within your state, somewhere in the books.
Very good. Someone in the Q&A asked if you may know how many domestic violence survivors are also victims of human trafficking.
Specifically deaf? If
It
it's
didn't
specifically
state.
deaf, domestic, I'm not sure. I don't know what the exact answer is for that regarding human trafficking. I'm not sure. I don't know if that, I would say it's pretty low comparatively. I don't know, oftentimes, like if they are coming from a foreign country and they don't recognize that they're deaf or that they can't hear or whatever and are being human trafficked, I'm not sure. So that I would say it's a low percentage, but statistically, I don't know what that is. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't think I have an answer for that either, unfortunately. Another person in the chat asks if you have other thoughts on good resources for immigrants who speak sign languages from other countries outside of ASL.
Amber, I can take over. So a good example is we have a Spanish interpreter today, right? We have a Spanish interpreter. So it's the same thing of Spanish Sign Language. We have Spanish Sign Language interpreters. So please make sure you ask them, what is your native language? What do you prefer? It could be Korean Sign Language. It could be Spanish Sign Language. It could be sign language from Vietnam. So we do have resources available, other foreign sign language interpreters, because they also have their own sign languages in those countries. And we unfortunately don't have a lot of those interpreters, you know, we are lacking. But we could try to find different ways to get them the resources they need. So sometimes you have to bring in an English interpreter with an ASL translator or a different foreign language interpreter. Sometimes we'll get several interpreters together to work as a team to make sure the communication is, you know, flowing properly from one person to the other, so we can get creative in those situations.
Excellent. Another person asks if the deaf helpline is automatically answered through video phone.
Yes, our services are all completely VP automatically. So the second you connect, you know, like you can't, like a hearing person who's trying to call another hearing person, it's the same idea. A lot of times you have to, like if you're using VRS, you have to wait until an interpreter connects, and it can be a few minutes longer. So sometimes there's technical issues. But with our hotline, it's so nice because you can connect immediately. And then sometimes if you're using VRS, you have to call an interpreter, and then there's a hold time for that. And there's another wait time for an interpreter to connect. You know, it can be very frustrating for deaf people when they're using a video phone. And then sometimes it's like tag, you know, because they're trying to call back and they don't answer the video phone. And so it can be very frustrating. So this saves a lot of time for deaf people. So it immediately connects with someone who uses sign language, and it's on a video phone.
Okay, one last request is if someone could, or if you could show them the sign for help me. They don't know the sign, but would at least like to be able to recognize that sign.
Yes, and we can teach ASL. Unfortunately, I want you guys to do some research. You know, as a deaf instructor right now, there's so much available on YouTube. There's so much available on Instagram. There's so many channels, Facebook. They even have a new app that was just, I think it's called Ling, something like that. And it's all in sign language. It's ASL, and it teaches like very basic signs. And so if any of your guys' agencies could, you know, learn a little bit of basic signs, really that would make the world of a difference to deaf survivors. The fact that you're willing to learn on your own time to learn a couple of signs would be amazing.
Wonderful. Okay, well, unfortunately, that is all the time we have for questions. Thank you all so very much for being part of today's session. And Olivia, Kelsey, and Amber, thank you so very much for your presentation today. For those of you asking, you will receive a recording, a copy of the PowerPoint, and a link to a downloadable certificate of attendance for today's session. So thank you so much. Watch for that email, and we look forward to seeing you all in the future. So thank you to our interpreters. Olivia, have a wonderful day. Okay, bye everyone.
Thank you.